Pack your things and leave. I don't want to see your face in this house again." My husband said that to me on a Tuesday morning, standing in the kitchen doorway in his bathrobe. Holding a coffee mug like this was the most casual conversation in the world. I was 34 years old, 9 years into our marriage, and I had just told him I wanted to go back to school. That was it. That was the whole crime. I'd found a part-time MBA program at Dalhousie. Evening classes, weekends, self-funded. I wasn't asking for his money. I wasn't asking him to change anything about his life. I was asking for his support, or at minimum, his tolerance. Instead, he looked at me the way you look at someone who has disappointed you so completely that words feel like a waste of effort. "You're 34, he said. "What exactly do you think you're going to build at 34? I didn't answer. I knew better than to answer when he used that tone. He set down his mug and shook his head slowly. "You've never finished anything in your life. You quit the graphic design program. You quit the photography thing. You quit that little Etsy shop after 3 months. He paused. "You're a quitter, Simone. Some people just are." My mother-in-law was visiting that week. She was sitting at the kitchen table behind him, and I watched her look down at her toast like she'd found something very interesting in the bread. She didn't say a word. She never did. I left that afternoon. I took 2 suitcases, my laptop, and the small oil painting I'd bought myself the previous Christmas because he'd forgotten to get me anything. I drove to my sister's apartment in Halifax and sat on her couch for an hour without crying, which surprised both of us. "He's always done this," she said quietly. "I know. So, what are you going to do?" I looked out her window at the gray November sky over the harbor and thought about it seriously for the first time in years. "I'm going to finish something," I said. What my husband didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that I hadn't quit the Etsy shop. I'd evolved it. The shop started as a side project during the 2nd year of our marriage. I'd been making hand-lettered prints, custom illustrations, small things. It wasn't serious. Even I didn't take it seriously at first. But I had a background in visual communication from the 2 years I did complete of that design program, and somewhere around month 4 of the shop I started getting requests that went beyond prints. A small bakery in Dartmouth wanted a full brand identity. A yoga studio in Bedford needed a website and packaging design. A real estate agent wanted marketing materials that didn't look like everyone else's. I said yes to all of them. I taught myself what I didn't know. I worked at the kitchen table at midnight while my husband watched hockey in the other room. By the time he called me a quitter, that little Etsy shop had quietly become a boutique branding agency with 11 ongoing clients. 2 junior contractors I'd brought on remotely, an annual revenue that had crossed $480,000. I had never told him. Not because I was hiding it, but because every time I tried to talk about work, his eyes went somewhere else. He wasn't interested in what I built. He was only interested in whether it was impressive enough to mention to people. And to him, a woman selling things on the internet was not impressive enough. So I stopped mentioning it, and he stopped asking. The separation was relatively clean, at least on paper. We didn't have children. The house was in his name, which he reminded me of multiple times during those first weeks, as if I might have forgotten. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Priya, who my sister had used during her own divorce 2 years earlier, told me I had more leverage than I thought. 9 years of marriage, documented contributions to the household, and a business that had been partially funded through shared finances during its earliest months. I told her I wasn't interested in a fight. I wanted it to be over. "That's fine," Priya said. "We can settle quickly. But I need you to understand what you're walking away from." "I understand." She looked at me for a moment. Most people don't at first. They find out later. I nodded. I already knew what I was walking away from. I was walking away from 9 years of being told I wasn't enough, which felt less like a loss and more like setting down something very heavy I'd been carrying up a very long hill. I moved into a rental in the south end of Halifax. 1 bedroom, exposed brick, good light. I put up the oil painting above my desk and started working longer hours than I ever had before. Within 8 months, things changed considerably. The agency had a name now, properly incorporated, not an Etsy shop, not a side project. We had 17 clients across Atlantic Canada, a few in Ontario, and 2 in British Columbia who'd found me through a referral. I hired a full-time project manager named Felicity, a recent NSCAD grad who turned out to be extraordinary. I moved us into a proper office space on Barrington Street, half a floor in a heritage building with original hardwood and windows that faced the water. I wasn't rich. Let me be clear about that, because this isn't that kind of story. But I was stable, I was growing, and I was building something that felt real in a way that nothing in my marriage ever quite had. I also enrolled in that MBA program. Evening classes, just like I'd planned. My husband didn't know about any of it. We weren't in contact. The divorce had been finalized 6 months earlier, and as far as I knew, he had moved on with his life entirely. His mother had called me once, in those early weeks, and said something carefully worded about how these things were unfortunate, and she hoped I'd land on my feet. I thanked her politely, and never heard from her again. I had, in fact, landed on my feet. But no one from that part of my life knew it yet. The event happened on a Thursday in late September. The Halifax Chamber of Commerce holds an annual business excellence dinner every fall at the Westin Nova Scotian. Black tie, seated dinner, award presentations. It's a significant event. The kind that gets covered in local business media, that people buy tables for months in advance. I had been nominated in the emerging business category, which I hadn't campaigned for and hadn't expected, and I'd bought a table for myself and 7 colleagues. I almost didn't go. I hate those kinds of events. Too loud, too much small talk, too many conversations that feel like auditions. Felicity essentially forced my hand by buying herself a dress and telling me we were going. So we went. The room was full by the time we arrived. I found our table near the middle of the floor, ordered sparkling water, and settled in for what I assumed would be a pleasant but draining evening. I didn't see them until the cocktail hour was almost over. My husband and his mother were standing near the bar on the far side of the room. For a moment, I just stared. The rational part of my brain registered the information. Yes, those are real people. Yes, that is him. Yes, that is her. And then did absolutely nothing useful with it. I hadn't seen either of them in almost 2 years. He looked the same, slightly grayer at the temples, the same stance, the same way of holding a drink with 2 fingers, the same slight tilt of his chin when he was talking to someone he wanted to impress. He was with a group of 3 or 4 people I didn't recognize. His mother stood slightly to the side in a navy dress looking at her phone. I turned back to my table. "You okay?" Felicity asked. "My ex-husband is here." She turned to look. I touched her arm. "Don't," I said. "Sorry. Is it going to be a problem?" I thought about it honestly. "No," I said. "I don't think so." We sat down when the dinner was called, and I found myself thinking about the last time I'd been in the same room as him. The kitchen, the bathrobe, the mug. You're a quitter, Simone. Some people just are. The thought landed differently now than it used to. It didn't hurt, it just sat there like an old photograph of somewhere you used to live. The award presentations began after the main course. There were 5 categories. I was third. When the MC read out the nominees for Emerging Business, I heard my name and the name of my agency spoken into a microphone in front of 400 people, and I had the strange sensation of hearing myself described by someone else. The growth trajectory, the client roster, the team size, the recognition from the Atlantic Business magazine earlier that year. I didn't win, as it turned out. A man who ran a sustainable seafood distribution company out of Lunenburg took the category, and he deserved it. I applauded genuinely. But something had happened in that room during those 2 minutes while my name was on the screen, and the MC read out the highlights. I didn't know it yet. I found out afterward. When the presentations finished, and the room shifted back into networking mode, I excused myself to use the restroom. On my way back, navigating through clusters of people with business cards and glasses of wine, I almost walked directly into his mother. We stopped at the same moment. She looked at me the way someone looks when they've been caught. Doing something they're not sure requires an apology. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. Simone, she said. Hello, I said. A pause. I didn't know you'd be here. I was nominated, I said simply. Something moved across her face that I couldn't entirely read. She glanced over her shoulder, back toward where my ex-husband was standing, and then back at me. We saw the screen, she said. Your company? Yes, another pause. Longer this time. I didn't know, she said, and something about the way she said it made me think she meant more than just tonight. More than just the award. I think she meant all of it. The agency, the clients, the Barrington Street office. The revenue she'd had no idea existed while she'd sat at her son's kitchen table and looked at her toast. I didn't tell her any of that. I just nodded. It's going well, I said. Then I excused myself and went back to my table. He found me 20 minutes later. I was in conversation with two other business owners when I felt that particular shift in the air that happens when someone approaches who isn't sure of their welcome. I turned around, and he was standing there, a little closer than was comfortable, holding a fresh drink. Simone. Hi, I said. The two people I'd been talking to read the situation with impressive speed and suddenly remembered they needed to speak to someone across the room. We stood there. He looked different up close than he had from across the room. Less certain. There was something around his eyes that I didn't recognize, or maybe I did recognize it and had just never seen it directed at me before. Something adjacent to respect, something adjacent to regret. I saw the presentation, he said. I waited. I didn't know the business had grown like that. No, I said. You didn't. He shifted his weight slightly. You built all of that since you told me to leave? Yes, he had the decency to look uncomfortable. I didn't know about the agency. Before, I didn't realize. I tried to. Not aggressively. Just as a fact. Multiple times. You weren't particularly interested. The discomfort deepened. Simone, I'm not angry, I said, and I meant it completely. I want you to know that. I'm genuinely not angry. But I need you to understand something. I kept my voice level. It wasn't about the business. The business didn't matter. What mattered was that you had already decided what I was worth, and then you just stopped looking. You stopped asking. You stopped being curious about me years before you asked me to leave. He didn't say anything. The leaving was fine, actually. It was the best thing that could have happened. I just want you to understand the part that wasn't fine. The part where the person who was supposed to be your partner became invisible to you. The room was loud around us. Music, conversations, the clink of glasses. In the middle of all of it, he stood there with his drink and didn't have a word to say. Finally, I'm sorry, 2 words. They came out like he'd had to pull them up from somewhere far down. I nodded. I appreciate that. And then I went back to my table, picked up my wine, and had a genuinely good rest of the evening. Felicity asked me about it in the cab on the way home. How do you feel? I thought about that, honestly, watching the lights of the harbor slide past this window. Relieved, I said. But not because of the award, or because he saw it. That was just timing. Coincidence. Then what? Because I realized I stopped waiting for that conversation about a year ago. And I didn't notice until tonight that I'd stopped waiting. Which means I actually moved on. I actually did it. She was quiet for a moment. That's a good thing. Yes, I said. It is. My mother-in-law called the following week. I almost didn't pick up. I'm still not entirely sure why I did. I wanted to say something, she started. Her voice was more careful than usual. More deliberate. I should have said it a long time ago. At the kitchen table. That morning. I heard everything he said to you, and I didn't speak up, and I've thought about it more times than I can count. I sat down. You didn't deserve that, she said. None of it. You were always working, always building something, always trying. I could see it. I just never. I let him define what counted as trying. And that was wrong. That was wrong of him, and it was wrong of me to stay silent. I didn't know what to do with that. It was the most honest thing she had ever said to me in 9 years of knowing her. Thank you, I said eventually. That means more than you might think. I'm proud of what you've built, she said. I know that probably sounds strange, coming from me, but I am. It did sound strange, and I sat with that for a while after we hung up. I thought about what those words would have meant to me at 34, standing in the kitchen doorway with my suitcase. How I would have held on to them. How I would have needed them. I didn't needed them. I didn't need them now. Not in the same way. They were kind, and I received them as kindness. But they didn't change anything about the foundation I'd built or the direction I was heading. The ground under me was solid, because I had made it solid. One decision and one client and one late night at a time, without anyone's approval keeping me standing. The following spring, we expanded into Ontario. I hired 3 people in Toronto, opened a small satellite office in the Distillery District, and flew out twice a month for the first year. Felicity took on an operations role that she'd essentially created for herself, which was exactly the kind of initiative I tried to build a company around. By the end of that fiscal year, we crossed $2 million in revenue. I didn't announce it anywhere. I noted it quietly in my own records, poured myself a glass of wine from a bottle I'd been saving, and sat by my window in Halifax and watched the harbor in the dark. I thought about the kitchen table, the bathrobe, the mug. What exactly do you think you're going to build at 34? This, I thought, this is what I was going to build. I finished the MBA 2 years later. Convocation was on a warm June morning at the Rebecca Cohn Auditorium. My sister came. My mother flew in from Fredericton, which she almost never does. 2 of my closest colleagues from the agency sat together a few rows back and embarrassed me completely by cheering when my name was called. I walked across the stage in heels that were slightly impractical for the situation and accepted the degree from a dean I'd never met. And the whole thing was over in about 45 seconds. Afterward, outside in the sunshine, my sister hugged me for a long time. How does it feel? She asked. I thought about it. Like closing a tab, I said. You know that feeling when you've had too many things open and you finally close the ones you don't need anymore? It feels like that. She laughed. That's the least romantic thing anyone has ever said about graduating. I know. I squinted into the sun and smiled. But it's true. I've told this story to a few people over the years. Not publicly, not often. Usually late at night, over drinks, when someone is going through something similar. A relationship that made them smaller than they were, a version of themselves they'd had to leave behind in order to find out who they actually were. The thing I always say, the thing I mean completely is this. The moment that changed my life wasn't walking out of that kitchen. It wasn't opening an office on Barrington Street, or crossing a revenue milestone, or hearing my name over a microphone in a hotel ballroom. It was the moment I stopped building something in order to prove a point. Because when I was still trying to prove the point, when some part of me was still working those late nights to show him, to show his mother, to show anyone who had ever looked at me, and seen something less than what I knew I was. The work felt like an argument I was trying to win. The moment I stopped doing it for them and started doing it only for me, for the actual pleasure of building something real and lasting, and mine, everything got lighter. Not easier. Lighter. That's the difference no one tells you about. That's the part that doesn't fit on a Chamber of Commerce award presentation slide. You don't heal by proving them wrong. You heal by reaching the place where proving them wrong is no longer the point. Where you look up from your desk on an ordinary Tuesday evening, with the harbor lights on the water and your second cup of tea going cold, and realize that the approval you spent years chasing has become genuinely irrelevant to the life you are, without question, already living. That's when you know you're done. That's when the whole thing is finally, completely over. And that Tuesday evening, sitting at my desk with cold tea and a company I built from nothing, I was done.